Hey, what's going on, everybody? So in this section, we are going to go through the cold call script. Now, this is probably going to be one of the most important sections this is probably going to be one of the most important sections in the entire cold call module. So make sure you definitely pay attention, take notes, and follow along. And this lesson is going to be definitely longer because we're going to go through the entire script in this video. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so what I have here is going to be the cold call script, and it's going to be in the format of either a Keynote or a PowerPoint, whichever you prefer, whether you're Mac or PC, but essentially it's the same thing, right? And in the beginning, I have the cold call strategy, like we talked about, where no matter who you're calling and what you're selling, you're always going to follow this process from doing the cold call, building rapport, agenda, uncover pains, and next steps, right? And so essentially, the entire script is for you to know exactly what to say and do at every one of these stages. So there's no mystery and guessing of what you should do. You already know what to do, and you pretty much have it all planned out. Now, obviously you don't want to be a sales robot and just go word for word, but you generally want to have the idea of what to say and how to say it so that, when you get better at it, you don't even have to look at your script. You can kind of just understand what the person wants, and you can kind of go with the flow and say the right things at the right time to actually generate those meetings. So let's go ahead and get started. So in the script, I have this diagram here. Obviously, if you're calling the reception, you're going to go through the reception and have a whole another lesson on how to do that. In the beginning, I put the sections on getting past gatekeepers, gatekeepers again, and then gatekeepers again. But where we're going to start for this lesson is, once you actually get past the gatekeepers, where do you actually, or if you have the direct contact line or the direct phone number to the decision maker you want to talk to, what do you actually need to do to start that meeting and get it going, right? So, starting off with the research, right? Here are a couple questions that you have to answer before you even start your cold calls, right? So what level of decision maker are you calling, whether it's a chief marketing officer, VP, director? Make sure you check the person's LinkedIn profile so you can leverage any information on the call. Check any news relevant to the company. What are the main problems that the company is experiencing that your product or service may potentially solve? And if you have 1 to 3 companies that you helped get a result that maybe this prospect would like as well, that would help as well. And does the prospect already work with any competitors? So make sure you have the answer to all of these questions before you cold call, or else you're not going to be prepared for success when you actually do your cold calls, okay? So let's start things off, right? In the beginning, you are building rapport, which means that you are getting the person to like you as a person and to agree to have a 5-minute conversation, right? So the strategy here is don't be pushy, don't be salesy. Start with a pattern interrupt, meaning, don't be like every other salesperson and be different because people perceive different as better. And what you want to do generally is you want to ask for help because it's hard for people to turn down others who need help. And you remember that you're not selling anything yet. You're looking for a fit to work together. So here's how it's going to go down. So ring, 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 you give them a call. The prospect, let's say the name is John. They say, hey, it's John. How can I help you? Or, hey, it's John. What's up? Or, hey, John, who is this? And you'll say, hey, John, it's Patrick from Oracle. How you doing today? And John's going to be like, yeah, I'm fine. What is this call about again? And then here's where you're going to ask for help. You're going to say, I'm actually a little lost, John. Do you mind if I take a second to tell you why I'm calling? And John will say, okay, sure. So let's go ahead and dissect this real quick. So in the beginning, I asked, I said, hey, John, it's Patrick from Oracle. It's my name. You can also say your last name too, like Patrick Dang from Oracle. How are you doing today? I like to use how are you doing today. Some people say, they don't like using this phrase. Personally, I like it because you can get a read of their tonality, and then you can, mimic their tonality and get the feel of how you should act towards them. And usually they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm doing fine, right? So it doesn't really matter what they say here because all they really want to know is what is the call about again. And then it opens up the opportunity for you to say, I'm actually a little lost, John. Do you mind if I take a second to tell you why I'm calling? Now, the only reason why I'm asking, how are you doing today, is so I can get to this next line, which is I'm a little lost. And the reason why I'm using this line is because when you basically act like you're lost, and you kind of are lost, right? Because you're looking for the right person to talk to and you're not sure if John is the right person. So you're not lying to John. You are telling the truth. And when you say, I'm actually a little lost, people like to help other people who are in trouble or need help, right? So now you are in need help because you want to talk to the right person. And then you just ask them politely, do you mind if I take a second to tell you why I'm calling? Now, when you do it this way, it's very difficult for the prospect to say no, right? Because they're already on the phone with you. You need some help, and you're being polite, and you're giving them a clear reason of what you want to do, and you're, taking a second to tell you why I'm calling. You're not taking 5 minutes. You're not taking 10 minutes. You're taking a second, meaning literally maybe like 10 seconds, and you basically create a situation where the person, they're only, like 99% of the time they're going to say yes because, it's hard to deny this line. Pretty much, that's what I always use for my cold calls. And then the next step is the agenda, right? When you're saying, do you mind if I take a second to tell you why I'm calling? You're basically just setting up for the agenda, the next 30 seconds of the call, okay? So the strategy here is to quickly and concisely explain why you're calling, what value you provide, and why the prospect should spend 5 minutes to talk to you, right? So here it's basically like maybe like 10 seconds. And then here it's going to be maybe like 30 seconds. And then the next part is going to be like 5 minutes, okay? So you can only get to the agenda if you build rapport. If you don't build rapport, you cannot get to the agenda. And you can only get to, let's say, the pains unless you do the agenda, right? So that's why it's a step-by-step process. So let's go ahead and do this. So when John says, okay, sure, you're basically going to say this. I'm part of the Human Strategic Partnerships team at Oracle, and I help hospitals in California keep their HR and recruiting software up to date with today's market. Now, the reason I'm calling is because I noticed that on your company website, you weren't using any recruiting software yet, and I'm sure it probably takes you a lot of time to process all those applications manually. So I wanted to talk for 5 minutes to learn a little bit more about your company and your business and see if I can help you in any way. And by the end of our conversation, if we find that there's a fit for us to work together, great. And we can move on to whatever the next steps would be. But if we find, it doesn't make sense for us to work together right now, totally fine. Is that okay with you? Or variation? Does that sound fair to you? And the prospect is essentially going to say, all right, sounds okay to me. So essentially, if you said this entire block of text right at the beginning of the call, people do not want to hear it because you're talking too much. That's why in the beginning, you have to set up the rapport to even earn the permission to say this long block of text, because they say it was okay for you to do that, right? For you guys, you want to basically switch out your role in your company and the value that you bring with Minds, and whatever you're selling, put it in here. So essentially, you're just taking out you're changing the first 2 sentences, and everything else is pretty much the same. So if you're selling marketing services to, retail businesses or something, right, then change it to that. And also you kind of share the pains real quick, right? You're calling because you weren't using a website. So you talk about a pain for a second, and then you talk about, how you might be able to help them, and you tease a solution, and you ask for 5 minutes to see if it makes sense to work together. Now, if it makes sense for this person and they're like, oh yeah, I actually do have that problem, right? Which they should because you did your research, then they're going to say, all right, sounds okay to me. And then you move on to the next phase of the cold call. So the strategy here is you're going to talk about the pains, right? It's all about uncovering the prospect's pain to see if they're going to be a good fit to buy your product or service. So the strategy is you're going to ask questions to uncover the prospect's pain. You turn a latent pain into a realized pain, right? A pain someone they don't know that they have, and you make them realize they have a pain, and you make it hurt as much as possible, okay? And you're gonna use this time together, the pain section, to qualify the prospect to make sure that they are a good fit for you, right? You wanna make sure they can actually buy. And you wanna start your first question to uncover pain with an intelligent question using the OPQ strategy, right? So I'll go ahead and explain this. So OPQ stands for observation, perspective, question. So no matter what product or service you're selling, you can use this to start off the conversation. And I like to use the intelligent question because it makes you more of an authority figure right off the bat, right? It makes it sound like you really know what you're saying versus just prying into someone's information. You're actually sounding smart. You sound like you're bringing value, and I'll show you how it works. So observation, right? You say, like I mentioned before, I noticed that your website didn't have any recruiting software. Observation, perspective. So it seems like if someone wanted to apply for a job at your company, they would have to, email the general email address. And from my experience helping hospitals, this usually is a logistical nightmare. So I actually was curious to know what your experience has been like when it comes to recruiting. And then from you saying this, prospect usually empathizes what I'm saying, and then they'll talk about their pains, right? So what am I doing here? I'm making an observation on their website. Basically, I'm saying I did some research on you guys, and I see that you guys have a problem that you don't have the recruiting software. Then I'm saying talking a little bit more about the problems from my perspective. So I'll say, from my experience working with similar hospitals like yours, without recruiting software, recruiting is a logistical nightmare because everyone's sending their applications to one email, and how are you supposed to get those applications to the right person, especially if you're a 1,000-person organization, right? So that's my perspective and my experience, and that I understand their problems. And then I ask a question and I say, so I was curious to know what your experience has been when it comes to recruiting. Now, if I ask this question without this context, it doesn't quite make sense, right? Because they'll be like, my experience with recruiting has been fine. Thank you, Patrick. Bye, right? But if you have an observation, you've done your research, and you give a perspective that you understand their pains, and you kind of show that, you helped other people solve those pains based on your perspective, then when you ask this question, there's a lot more context to it. And people are like, oh yeah, this guy understands my language. He gets me. Maybe he can actually help me out. And then from there, the prospect will basically tell you about their recruiting process and be like, oh my God, Patrick, you're right. We have one email and then, it's a mess and we have to use Excel sheets and this and that. And you basically get the prospect to trust you a little bit more and to talk about their business problems in hopes that, or they hope that you can probably solve it if they tell you all their problems. And the thing I always believe is that people are waiting. There's so many salespeople that don't listen, that when somebody actually does listen and when you ask these smart questions, people love to talk about their problems, right? In general, in life, people they really love to talk about their problems, but they find trouble finding other people they can trust with their problems. And so as a salesperson or business development person, that can be you. And so once they start talking about their pains, you want to ask more questions like, oh, interesting. How long has that been a problem? Can you tell me more about that? What's an example of when this happened? These are different variations. So when, this problem happened, what typically happens next? How do you solve that problem? How much money is this costing you, or how much time is this costing you? Have you tried anything to fix it? How does it make that feel? They'll be like, oh man, I hate this and that, right? You want to get them really emotional. And then once you really uncover the pains or get them to talk about the pains, you want to talk about what would they want to happen in a perfect world? So you say, okay, in a perfect world, what would you want this to look like? Or what happens when you do nothing? What's the cost, right? So essentially, once you get the prospect going, you basically ask these questions and you dive deeper and deeper into the prospect's pain, okay? And then from there, what's going to happen is you also want to qualify the prospect by asking qualification questions. So, basically it's like, do they have the budget? What's the timeline? Who is a decision maker? So this is like a decision making question. Is like, is there anyone else we should involve? Do you have a budget set aside to take care of this? When would you ideally like to take care of this? Is this a serious problem, or is it not worth investing time into, right? So these are qualifying questions that you would ask later on once you ask all these pain questions, because you want to get the prospect to be emotional first. And then from there, you want to get all the logistical details of, budget, timing, decision makers, and things like that. So essentially, once you do this, the prospect has a problem, that they're qualified to purchase your product and service. The next part of this process is the next steps, okay? So essentially what you want to do is you want to first summarize the problems the prospect mentioned during the pain phase of the call. Then you're going to quickly explain how you may be able to help solve those problems and make a recommendation on scheduling another discovery meeting where you or another account executive will dive deeper into the prospect's pain, right? So basically all this means is setting up the next meeting, right? So you say, all right, John, so let me make sure I got everything. And feel free to correct me if I got any of this wrong. Right now, your team is receiving over, let's say, 1,000 job applications per month, but you're still reviewing and organizing each application manually. And your director is looking to solve the challenge by the end of the quarter and has allocated a budget of $10,000 per month for this. Is that everything? And the prospect says, yeah, I think that's everything, right? So you would get all this information during the pain phase and the qualification phase. Then you say, okay, great. Based on everything we talked about, it seems like this is something you really want to take care of. Would you like me to share how I might be able to help you out? And prospect says, sure, go ahead and sell me, basically. And basically you go into your pitch of, you'd be like, all right, great. Now what we do is we help X accomplish Y by doing Z. Basically you give a quick pitch, elevator pitch of how you solve the problems that the prospect talked about, right? And that's pretty much the format of how you do it. Maybe it's just a sentence or 2 or 3 sentences. You don't want to talk too much about yourself. You just want to make sure the prospect understands that you can help them. And they're going to say, all right, that actually makes sense. Then you say, all right, well, I'm glad we're both on the same page here. Now, at this point, since you're looking to take care of this problem now, do you mind if I make a recommendation? The prospect says, sure, go ahead. And you'll say, all right, great. Since you are interested in moving forward with the next step, typically what we'll have clients do is schedule another meeting with you or anyone else you feel should be involved for a discovery call. And this is where we're going to dive deep into your challenges to see exactly how we can help solve your problem. And from the discovery call, if everything makes sense to move forward, we'll schedule another demonstration on how our product works and how it'll solve all your challenges you mentioned now and during the discovery call. So if that works for you, are you available for a discovery call this or next week? So essentially all I'm saying is like, look, if you have this problem, we can help solve it. Here's what the next steps are. You basically want to handhold the prospect into your sales cycle, and you just want to say, hey, you don't have to think about it. All you got to do is schedule the next meeting where we're going to talk about your problems. If it makes sense to move forward after we talk about your problems, then we are going to schedule a demonstration where we're going to show you our product. So if it works for you, are you available this or next week? Now, typically if they are actually qualified, they see the value and they have a real pain, they're just going to be like, all right, that makes sense. This week is okay or next week is okay. Then you go ahead and just schedule the meeting, right? If they give you an objection, then, you just basically do objection handling. And then you give them a reason for why they should schedule a meeting. But, depending on what objection they give you, then that's how you're going to respond appropriately. And so once you schedule that meeting, that is essentially the end of the cold call, because on the next meeting, whether it's you on the call or an account executive on the call, it's warm, right? They already know who you are. They already told you their problems. There's some trust and rapport that's built. So from there, it's all about, selling and selling someone who knows who you are. But essentially, this is the process that you're going to go through when it comes to cold calling. And, that's pretty much it. It's actually very simple. Each cold call is like maybe 5 minutes if it's a good one, or it could be longer if you want to dive deeper into the prospect's problem. But the only goal is to get them to the next meeting. If you can get them to the next meeting as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible, then you're good to go. And so with that said, that is pretty much how you are going to use the cold call strategy, and that's how you're going to use the cold call script to execute on these strategies.